I believe that everybody has a story, and I'm fascinated to hear them. So come with me as we take a walk down Fascination Street. Welcome back, Streetwalkers. This episode is with Zak Pashak. Zak is the founder and president of Detroit Bikes, located obviously in Detroit. And in this episode, we'll talk about where he grew up, which was Canada, and some of the businesses that he started while he was in Canada, which center around music and music venues and even a music festival, before deciding to move to Detroit and open up Detroit Bikes. We talk about why he did that, we talk about how it's going, and what makes his bicycles different than some of the other bicycles you might find. This was a super lot of fun. It was sort of an accident. I was reaching out to presidential candidate Andrew Yang to have him on, and it turns out Zak is Andrew's friend and saw my post, and then he responded, and then we started talking, and then here you go. So enjoy, folks. This is my conversation with the founder and president of Detroit Bikes, Zak Pashak.
Yeah, talk to me, yeah.
Welcome to Fascination Street podcast, Zak Pashak. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm good, Steve.
Oh, that is good to hear. First of all, I want to thank you for doing this. I really appreciate it. We sort of found each other, I guess, kind of accidentally on Twitter. I was tweeting at somebody, and you sort of responded. So here we are, man. Thanks.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I saw you tweeting at my friend Andrew, who's running for president.
Is he actually your friend?
Yeah, he is.
Oh, how cool is that?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing to have a friend run for president, and kind of surprise everyone by doing so well. He actually kicked off his campaign here at the factory here in Detroit that I'm talking to you from right now.
Are you kidding?
No, not kidding at all. I'm the first person who got to introduce him at a rally by saying, and I'm pleased to introduce to you the next president of the United States, Andrew Yang. And at that point, there was about 20 people in the room with us. He was great. Andrew's always great. He's got a big magnetic personality. He's really a wonderful, special guy. He lights up a room. And so, he was wonderful, but I did feel a little awkward saying that because it seemed like such a long shot, at that point to introduce someone as the next president of the United States. And, honestly, even though he's now like in 6th place or something or 5th place, it still would feel like a long shot, but certainly not quite as long, as it was back then. But anyways, so I saw you tweet at him and I thought, Andrew probably is pretty busy.
To say the least.
But I'll talk to anyone. So I just thought I'd write you and say, hey, I'd be happy to talk if you're interested in just kind of finding guests. So I reached out.
Well, just to be clear, it's not just guests. It's guests who have a fascinating story, which parentheses, I think everybody does. So there you go.
No, yeah, fair enough. And I agree with you completely. Everyone does have an interesting story. You just got to ask the right question.
That's right. You just have to be interested. That's all. If you're interested in somebody's life, just the mere notion of being interested will bring up those questions in your head anyway, because you genuinely want to know more about whatever they're talking about. And then stuff just goes where it goes. And then you get to meet some really cool people and hear their stories and share their stories.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. I love what you're doing. I do it myself. I find if I'm sitting on a bus, next to a stranger, sometimes I don't want to talk, but sometimes I do. And you can get going and just you realize I could have decided not to talk to this person, but I'm sure glad I decided to talk to them because, of course, they've got this amazing story. And I think you're right that everybody does if you care.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well done. So don't ever stop doing that, man. That's really cool. So where were you born, Zak?
I was born in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada.
Let's assume that that's one of the colder Canadian places.
Yeah, it's pretty far north, especially compared to the Canada that people in Detroit are used to, which is Windsor. It's quite a bit more north and quite a bit further west, but still not too far from the American border.
Gotcha. Is America an influence that close, to where you grew up?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, it's not really just the physical proximity, but it's also just the media culture. So Canadians get a lot of American television. And because of that, we become, in Canada, pretty engrossed with American politics. And so, Canadians will follow the American presidential election as well, or sometimes even better than they'll follow Canadian federal elections. Just because you turn on the news and it's 9 of your 10 channels, or, I guess now 999 of your 1,000 channels will be American.
And now in 2020, probably half of those will feature some presidential candidate. There's so many of them right now. It's crazy.
Yeah, for sure. Although one less today.
Oh, who dropped out?
Booker.
Oh, really? I did not hear that.
Yeah. So it's winnowing. Yeah, winnowing slowly.
That's how it starts. So, did you go to college or a university, whatever you call it over there?
Yeah, we call it both, although college is usually sort of not as advanced as university. But I went to the University of Alberta. I was kicked out of the University of Alberta, though.
Congratulations.
For poor attendance. Yeah, I did not enjoy the experience. Although I did really get into the extracurriculars. I loved campus radio. I was a late night campus radio DJ. And then I transitioned from that into doing the Friday afternoon show where I would interview bands that were coming through town.
Oh, no way.
So every Friday I'd have 2 or 3 bands on my show, and they'd invite me to their show, and I'd go backstage and hang out with them and drink all the beer in their rider. Sort of became notorious at these venues. They'd be like, Zach's here again. But the bands would like it just because they'd have, someone in town. Here's some band touring through, remote Western Canadian provinces, and they've at least got somebody who they're familiar with who can come see their show. So I ended up making a lot of friends in the North American music scene, kind of the indie scene through that. But yeah, my studies in university were less of a passion for me, I guess, than the radio. And
Sure.
but I eventually became the news director at the radio station, and I actually learned a lot just through that, through the volunteer work I was doing at university.
Well, that sounds dope, man. Why don't you have a podcast?
I would love to. At some point, that would be fun.
You have the interest to talk to people like, on buses and whatnot, and then you have all that experience behind a mic. Yeah, you'll do it.
Yeah, and there's a little production experience, too, because as the news director, I would have to edit the programs. So, a podcast would be great. I've been kicking around the idea for quite a while, but in the meantime, it's really fun to answer questions, too. So I'm happy to just be on podcasts as well.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, both sides are really fun. I loved interviewing, though. It's hard to say what I like more. It's really fun to interview. It's also fun to be interviewed.
I agree. So this part of your story where you were playing music and getting to interview these bands and whatnot, I guess that's how you sort of segued into Broken City?
Yeah. So I went to school in Edmonton at the University of Alberta, got into the music scene there, got kicked out of school, moved back home to Calgary, which is just down the road. It's sort of like the Shelbyville to Edmonton Springfield, or vice versa. It's sort of our rival Alberta provincial city. Went back home to Calgary, which is a 3.5-hour drive south of Edmonton. And just thought, hey, there was a pretty good music scene in Edmonton. I enjoyed that. Calgary seems to be lacking a little bit of that. What can I do in Calgary to foster that side of what I liked in Edmonton and help make that stronger here in Calgary? And my pathway to doing that was through the music scene and through my radio program. Eventually I thought, hey, this city needs a venue that kind of can go hand in hand with this stuff and be a place where interesting, young musicians can get together and have fun and learn how to perform and kind of create our own culture where we're not like waiting for the next thing to come to us, but where we're actually kind of creating as well, and where people who are local, who have those creative instincts, have an opportunity to express them.
Sure. So is Broken City still around?
Yeah, it is. I was just there over the Christmas holiday. Still going strong. So I've got 3 other business partners with it now. I sold 3/4 of it to 3 friends of mine when I left town, and they've kept it running pretty much the same way it was when I left it.
Did you do that just because you weren't going to be able to run it from out of town?
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to kind of divest myself of Canadian liabilities and responsibilities as much as possible. But I'm glad I still have a stake in it.
Sure. And so that's when you moved to America?
Yeah, so after years in the music scene, 7 or 8 years, I ended up opening another venue in Vancouver and was sort of living between both those 2 cities, which is about an hour plane ride, maybe 8-hour drive, so pretty far apart. But Vancouver is sort of the next biggest hub in Canada next to Calgary, sort of a natural path for Calgarians. A lot of them end up in Vancouver. But so I had a venue in Calgary and Vancouver, and then I started a pretty big music festival in Calgary that's still also going strong.
Is that Sled Island?
That's Sled Island, yeah. And then I ran for city council in Calgary in 2010, and the campaign went really well. I had a bunch of great volunteers kind of came out of nowhere and really helped. And I met a ton of Calgarians and learned a bunch. And I really got into transportation policy through that campaign. Got really interested in cities in general, what makes a city strong, what cities have made mistakes, and how transportation plays such a big role in that. There's multiple levels of government that make different types of decisions. And it seemed to me that some of the most important decisions that are made on a municipal level have to do with transportation, how people move around inside a city. And the theory of that can be really effective in changing the whole lifestyle of people who live in a place. So you don't need to wait for the federal government to do something. You don't need to sit back and, it's something that a local community can really care about and influence, and it can have a massive impact. So I saw it traveling to, I made myself take a trip to Copenhagen to see what that was like. And just kind of happy people, healthy people, outdoor lifestyle, even in a relatively northern climate. And a lot of it has to do with just the way that people move around that city, which is a lot of walking, a lot of public transit, and a lot of cycling. So I just got really interested in that. And after the campaign, I didn't really want to wait 4 years for the next election. I just felt like that would be 4 wasted years. I wanted to do something then. I geared myself up mentally for this change in career of becoming a city councilor. And when that didn't happen, I felt like a need to change anyways. I didn't really want to go back to just booking shows. I'd kind of tired a little bit of bands, like young indie bands. And so I thought, well, I'm going to go check out Detroit. I've been curious about this city for a long time. Way back when my family passed through Detroit, my last name's Pashak, which is a Czech last name. And when my, great-great-great-great-grandfather left, it was Bohemia. It hadn't become the Czech Republic yet. So there was a big Bohemian community here in Michigan, in Detroit. And they passed through there on their way up to Alberta, which is where I guess it would be my great-great-grandfather ended up, and was sort of one of the earlier people in the city of Calgary when it was started. But I'd always been curious about Detroit, and then also being in the music business. Detroit has just an incredible musical legacy. A number of genres of popular music have come out of Detroit, and even in terms of classical music and then every kind of music. Detroit is a hub of creativity. It's an industrial center, but one of the strengths of Detroit has also been the incredible creativity that's come out of this place. So I was fascinated by the city. I wanted to check it out and see, why are people so scared of this place? Why does it have this horrible reputation? What went wrong? And also, what went right? Why is the history of this place what it is? Why have so many incredible global contributions come out of Detroit, and kind of where is it now? So it was like a very compelling place for me.
Oh, dope. So why did you decide to run for city council? Why?
Well, so it's a little bit a family thing. My father was a member of the Legislative Assembly, so sort of like a state legislator, but a provincial one. In Canada, we've got provinces instead of states. And so I sort of was familiar with politics through that, and my family in general is political. I've had uncles run for office, and my mom publishes a magazine that's political and kind of runs in those circles. So I'm interested in that. Plus, what I was doing was pretty community oriented. Although it was the music scene, the reason that I was interested in the music scene was because of its impact on the community. I was interested in kind of an artistic, culturally relevant, fulfilling, creative place to live, and what I could do to encourage that. So for me, that didn't begin and end in putting a band on a stage. It was also what happens outside of that venue and the city as a whole. In Calgary, I would get reporters kind of asking me about issues of the day. I sort of started becoming someone who was sort of a quotable person, I guess, in Calgary, especially when issues related to music or venues, but then also it started to stretch into licensing and the business community. And I just sort of became a person in the community that had some influence and some opinions, and was seen as maybe an authority in some regard, but I guess just someone who maybe could help. Whenever you're political or in that situation, you also get a target on your back, and to many people, you're a villain, but to another group of people, you're seen as someone who's helpful and showing some leadership. So that kind of led me towards city council. Plus, I'd interacted a lot with the city of Calgary through the bar and just being a local business person, and then especially through the festival. I really got a sense of how the city ticked when I tried to get that festival started, and sort of found various suspicious pushback from certain departments, and just started to kind of figure out how things worked down at City Hall. And I realized that I could do something pretty positive in there if I were guess, given that nod from the community and elected to represent them.
Sure, that sounds awesome.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Guess what, Streetwalkers? The gear is here. A bunch of you have been asking for quite some time, and now finally it's here. Head over to FascinationStreetPod.com and check out the Gear tab. There, you'll find all kinds of FSP items to tickle your fancy. T-shirts, coffee mugs, sticker packs, pins, buttons, coasters, and my personal favorite, for just $5 you can get one of those weird little phone handle pop thingies. So head to FascinationStreetPod.com and show the world that you're proud to be a streetwalker. Special thanks to my good buddy Stephen O'Reilly from the Bar Star Podcast for these dope drum beats. Check out Steve's work at O'Reilly Drums on Instagram or search Stephen O'Reilly on YouTube.
Let's get back into it.
So you didn't win, but you made a heck of a showing, right?
Yeah, I felt like I did. I mean, I got over 9,000 votes, which is a lot of people marking your name down on a slip of paper. And I ran against an incumbent. And in Calgary, it's really hard to unseat an incumbent. In a lot of places it is, but especially Calgary, we don't tend to stray from what we're used to in that city. So, you know, the incumbent got, I think, just over 11,000, and I got just over 9,000. I think those were the numbers. Something along those lines. But that was really a strong show. It was a surprise. Plus, he outspent me 5-1. So, you know, I felt really proud of the result.
Well, I should say so. So, what made you decide to leave Canada and come to America?
You know, it wasn't so much coming to America as it was coming to Detroit, which happens to be in America. Like, it's not the typical immigrant story and like I was coming to America to like make a new life or something. I mean, I was, but it wasn't with like the vision of stars in my eyes or something. You know, Canada is a pretty free and safe and opportunity-filled society anyway. So it was more just a curiosity of Detroit and the city. Although that said, I mean, over the years, I'd taken many trips to the U.S. and many different American cities, and I'm charmed by this country. There are such great people in the United States, and it's a country that has, you know, a lot of power in the world, and with that, a lot of responsibility. And it's tough to be in that position because it's like you can't make everyone happy. You can't maintain your power without kind of doing some questionable things, I guess, sometimes. Or, you know, just it's a challenging country. There's a lot going on here, as everyone in this country seems to know. But I always loved coming to the States and just experiencing the culture. Even things like going to a football game and tailgating. And, you know, you just walk through a parking lot full of strangers who want to hug you and share like barbecue with you or whatever. It's like, you know, it's a pretty friendly country that, you know, there's differences, but at the end of the day, people kind of just want to get together and have fun with each other here. And there's a real kind of almost team spirit in the States that is really nice to be part of. But then again, for me specifically, it was more Detroit. Like I wouldn't have moved to some nice suburb in a Californian city or something. Like I wasn't really moving for comfort or opportunity. I was more moving. I mean, I guess it is opportunity, but it was more like an opportunity to do something that I could feel really good about and that I felt was making a positive contribution to the world, which is kind of what I think Detroit Bikes is. So I took this trip down here to see this city, and it's a city that in 2010, I don't think a lot of tourists were coming here. And certainly even people in the suburbs of this city wouldn't come into the city. And I can see why. I mean, it's kind of scary to look at still, you know, to drive through Detroit. There's, you know, burnt down houses all over the place. And it looks like a natural disaster hit this place. And I can see how that kind of scares people. But it shouldn't scare people, I don't think. I think people should try to understand what happened and how we can fix that, I guess, or at least be empathetic to it. So I came here and I just fell in love with it. I mean, the people I met were incredible. It's not like the people here are living in a situation like this because they're bad people. There are a number of factors that contributed to this, mainly the flight of over half of the population of the city and the tax base that left with that. And so all of a sudden you've got a small handful of residents, not a small handful, but a drastically reduced number of residents that are actually the poorest residents in the city, suddenly having to pay for the infrastructure upkeep of this giant, formerly richest city in the world with some pretty intense infrastructure burden. and all these roads everywhere that are super expensive to maintain, and, a bunch of expensive infrastructure, and they just simply couldn't keep up with that. So lots going on in the city, but the city I came and saw, it was just completely charming to me. The businesses that have held on throughout all this, the people who are here, their kind of values and the fun that people here have. It was a place I just knew I had to be part of this. It's been very rewarding. I've loved living here.
So your previous few businesses were centered around music and, festivals and things like that. So why bicycles?
Great question. So the bicycle part came from the city council run and the transportation policy interest. I figured that this was sort of an inevitable change in cities. What I realized is every city council across North America is at least considering bike infrastructure in a way that we've never really seen before in North America. And so, with bike infrastructure, what comes next is people needing bicycles. And when I went out to bike stores, what I found was that the bike stores either catered to athletic type of cycling, so like, spandex shorts and $4,000 bikes, and that wasn't really the type of cycling that is going to get people riding a bike around their city. That's going to kind of alienate people because you don't want to become that biking athlete. You just want to get around.
It's super intimidating.
It totally is. And yeah, the general attitude that you can bump into from people who are in that culture, it's like they don't really see transportation cycling as sort of worthy of their interest, which it adds to the intimidation. So I kind of thought, well, that's a problem. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you've got these bikes that are super cheap, Walmart bikes that cost $150. Meanwhile, like a good pan costs $150. Like, how the heck do you think you're going to get all that goes into a bicycle and have it be functional for that price? It's too cheap. And so people are buying these bikes that, they break, they're put together backwards. They've got super cheap components. They're not going to make you think that cycling is very fun.
And those cheaper ones are so heavy.
Yeah, they can be heavy. They can have plastic rims on them. So when you try to brake, if it's at all wet, like your brakes won't hold. They've got just cheap components that don't really hold up, and they're not very fun to ride. So I kind of thought, hey, if I can make a bike that's reasonably affordable, but has this really cool backstory, my mindset was almost kind of like, how the people with food, like, beer is a really good example. So like maybe 30 years ago, if you walked into a bar, you could kind of choose, like, you might get a Miller or you might get like a Bud. But now you can go into a bar and there's like, well, we've got Miller, we've got Bud, and we've also got like this beer that was brewed down the street, and we've got this little beer from a small town like 2 hours north of here, brewed by this guy named so-and-so. Like, people kind of got into beer production and local production, and the impact on that's been pretty great for consumers because now you've got a lot more products, that you can choose from, and it's a lot better quality and it's a lot fresher. And that's also better for the local economy because we're not just shipping all our money out to the Coors family in Colorado, but here in Michigan, we've got all these microbreweries now that actually have an impact. They're employing people and they're getting capital moving around. So I kind of like that idea of local production. And I think it's been super successful with beer and other products too, mostly products that you consume. But I kind of thought bikes might be the ramp into getting that mindset into a consumer product that you don't eat or drink. Bikes are something that you're pretty intimate with. I mean, you're physically on that thing. Your body is completely carried by it and is touching it. And it's a pretty intimate object. And when you really love a bike, it's kind of cool to know where it was made and who made it, and to have a kind of interesting backstory behind it. It's kind of worth spending a little bit more money on a bike that's good quality, because if you love it, you're going to ride it every day. If you live within 5 miles of work and you can ride a bike to work every day, I think you're going to have a better life. You're going to be healthier and happier, and you're going to save a ton of money. I mean, driving a car to work every day and parking, people complain about a bike being $700, and yet they're totally fine, driving a car where, they blow a tire and it's $700 to repair it, or, maybe not that much, but, you spend a ton on a car. You're spending $20, $30. Well, some people are spending $20, $30 a day in parking.
Yeah, that's true.
One summer of riding a bike to work, you paid for that bike. So get the bike that you love and that you're going to want to ride every day, and invest in a bike that's going to hold up and last and be fun to use.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter what's going on in the Middle East, leg power doesn't go up in price.
Yeah, exactly. That's one of the beauties of cycling. It's fueled by food. I mean, you just eat more stuff that you like to eat. That's what powers your bike. It's kind of a nice relationship.
Now, I have a window washing business, and so I have ladders and buckets and all kinds of stuff, so I couldn't really ride a bicycle to work. But we live in a small town outside of San Antonio, and we live about 2 miles from the downtown of our small town. And there is this really beautiful, river with ducks and all kinds of cool stuff. And then we have musical festivals and car shows, and just there's always some sort of an event downtown. And we only live, 2 miles away. So my wife and I, we bike to downtown all the time. And one of the other benefits that nobody talks about is I think only in New York you can, but everywhere else, I don't think you can get a ticket for bicycling while intoxicated. So you can go enjoy those beers and enjoy those bars and those musical venues and then ride your bicycle back home.
Yeah. So it's something I probably can't talk about because someone will end up suing me for like getting in a crash while drinking and
That's true.
cycling. So I'd have to say, don't drink and cycle. But between you and I, if you do it safely.
Yeah, there you go.
For sure. No, absolutely. There are a lot of liabilities that come with driving a car around. I mean, from DUIs to parking tickets to, repairs to all the gas to getting stuck in a traffic jam to being downtown, not being able to find parking. I mean, there's just, it's too much machine for what we use it for. Here in Michigan, I'll be going to like my neighbor's house for dinner down the street, and my wife is from Michigan and she'll want to drive. It's ingrained in people's minds here that you just drive everywhere. I'm like, that machine is capable of taking us across the country at 100 miles an hour. Like, why would we don't need that to go down the block. We have feet, like that. That's the right application for this endeavor. But we've just kind of become so hooked on cars, and it's weird that the cost of cars is sort of just this assumed burden for some people. Like there was an op-ed in our local business paper called Cranes, written by Keith Crane of the same last name as the paper. And he was complaining about bike lanes and the cost of putting these bike lanes in. But what kind of was baffling to me was like, do you not realize that car infrastructure is way more expensive? I mean, and also people die all the time, in cars. Like cars are deadly. But yet not every time, like many times when I'm doing an interview, people want to talk about bike safety with me. Like, what do I need to do to be safe on a bike? Bikes aren't the problem. No, it's the cars that are the problem. Cars are what kill cyclists, and they also kill other drivers and pedestrians. Cars are what's kind of deadly out there. And they're just incredibly expensive. I mean, think of all those overpasses and bridges and traffic lights and potholes that need to get repaired. And as a society, we are spending a fortune on this car lifestyle. It's just something that people seem to just take as a necessary part of society, but it really isn't. We don't need to spend all that money on cars. There are other ways to move around.
So you started Detroit Bikes in 2012, right?
Yeah, 2000, it might have been 2011. Our first bike came off the line in 2013. I think I started the company, 2011.
And did you have partners, or did you do this by yourself?
This was just by myself. I had hoped to kind of bring on partners as things move forward, but small scale manufacturing in an area that no one is doing any manufacturing is not a sexy investment opportunity, I found out. So I'm still kind of on my own in it for now, although things are kind of starting to change. It's starting to get a little busier down here.
So it's been a few years. I'm going to assume since you're still open and talking to me from there, it's going well?
It's been really hard for sure. I started with the brand Detroit Bikes, and I had thought naively that, hey, this is going to take off. We're priced at a pretty aggressive price point considering the quality of what we're making. And I figured bike stores across the country would just be thrilled that there's an American-made option again. In my research leading into starting the company, I went to a lot of bike stores and constantly was told, oh my God, if you could make a bike that would retail for $550 or $600, I would sell that day and night. I was told this by countless stores, but when I actually went out and made it, the story was very different. It's tough running a bike shop. It's a tough business. I think the margins are tight, and the big players are specialized and Trek, and their reps are pretty aggressive, and it's just a tough business. So anyways, I had thought this path to retail glory would be easy, but it wasn't. Stores, a few of them kind of checked us out a little bit reluctantly, but they'd never really tell our story the right way. They'd kind of say they'd compare our bike based on spec to the specialized or trek bikes. And that's not really the story for us. The story is, hey, this frame is made out of like American chromoly steel that they used to make race cars and aircraft. Like, this is a really good frame. And look at the welds on this. This is American welding of American steel. This is going to be a great ride. And this frame's got a lifetime warranty. But they didn't really want to tell that story. They wanted to compare it by spec, because that's sort of how you're trained to sell bikes in a bike store, because you're comparing usually one specialized bike to another specialized bike. So you're just kind of like working customers up that chain of like the specialized hierarchy or the trek hierarchy. So that didn't really pan out that well. I mean, we've got really good customers, people who buy our bikes, like our bikes, but we tend to just sell mostly through our retail store in Detroit and then direct to consumer online. And we've got like a handful of stores, but the brand itself hasn't really taken off. But what I did was I built this infrastructure to be able to accommodate the brand taking off. So I've got this 50,000 square foot factory in Detroit. And, while I've been, naively waiting for the brand to take off, I've realized I had to fill this capacity with something. So I started doing assembly contracts for other brands. And we've also started doing manufacturing work for other brands. So like right now, we're manufacturing the 125th anniversary bike for Schwinn, which is really cool. It's, I think, the first Schwinn made in America since Schwinn went bankrupt in the 80s. The brand is now owned by Pacific Cycle out of Wisconsin. And so they've been getting their bikes made out of Fushida in China for years, but for the 125th anniversary, they're getting them made by us. So this is a big deal. Schwinn is just such an iconic American brand, and it's so cool that they're going to have an American-made bike again.
How did you manage that?
They came to us. I'd been trying to pitch them a different line of business, which was assembly work, which is what we're actually starting to do for Dick's Sporting Goods now for their Nishiki bikes. But I'll get to that in a sec.
Hey, Streetwalkers, here's a word from our sponsors.
Hey guys, if you like what I'm doing, click the Amazon banner at the top of the homepage on FascinationStreetPod.com and do all of your shopping through Amazon. Once you click on it and it takes you to Amazon, you can bookmark it or add it to your favorites, and you won't have to go to my site each time. It helps me keep the show going, and again, thanks for listening.
Hey, are you interested in getting from A to B while sitting? At Detroit Bikes, we've got a new product that I think you're going to love. It's a bicycle. It's got two wheels, hence the bi. And the sickle is because it's a cycle that your wheel's going. So this is a product where you've got a seat. You are actually sitting while moving.
Wow.
And it's as easy as just pedaling, pushing with your legs. So we think that customers are going to love this product, and we hope you'll check it out at www.detroitbikes.com.
www.detroitbikes.com.
Let's get back into it.
So I had the president of Pacific and a couple of his top guys. They flew out and toured the factory, and we talked about potentially taking on a big assembly contract for them based on the tariffs, actually, trying to figure out how to adjust their supply chain. They're not convinced that the tariffs are going to stay in place, and so they don't want to move forward with that line of business. I think that they would. There's just no one's really sure what's going on with these, but if there was a commitment that those would actually stay in place, I think that they would move forward with that. But anyways, I'm getting a little too into the weeds on that. But basically, while they were out here, they said, before we do that, why don't we do this other project, which is they've got this 125th anniversary coming up. And so we're doing a recreation of the 68 Collegiate, which was this pretty cool commuter bike that Schwinn made, obviously, in 1968. And we did a full reproduction of it. And those frames are going to be welded and painted by us. Well, all the work. So fabricated, welded, painted, and then full assembly and wheel building here.
How many people do you have working for you?
Right now, we're just at about 15. We're about to hire probably 8 more.
Oh, wow.
And then we'll expand more from there. At our peak, we got up to almost 80 people in this building. That was about 3 years ago. We were making a bunch of bikes for New Belgium Brewery, and we were also doing the assembly contract for the New York City Bike Share Program, which is 3,000 bikes for the Brooklyn expansion of the New York City Bike Share Program. And so those contracts were both happening at the same time. And so we were really busy in this building. So that's what I was getting at when I was talking a bit about the brand versus our capacity. So the brand just sort of is trickling out bikes as needed. But meanwhile, I've been able to go out and get these bigger contracts for production for other companies. And that's really where we're starting to see some success. And the big story there is exporting goods. So we're starting to do all the assembly work for their Nishiki bikes. So basically the way things work right now is that American companies will go to usually a Chinese company, sometimes Taiwanese, but usually it's Chinese. And that Chinese company will give them a bike or like sell them a bike. But all the components in a bike can't be made in one factory. There's like 40-ish inputs on a bill of materials, and usually about 20 to 25 different companies that make all those different parts that go onto a bike. So there's a main sort of hub factory in China. Like, I shouldn't say hub because that's confusing, because there's a piece called a hub that's on a bike, but like a central factory. Typically, they might also make frames in that factory, and they'll do the assembly and wheel building. So that's kind of a similar setup to what we have here in Detroit. We make frames, we do assembly, we do wheel building. We also do paint. So that's kind of what you see in China too. So an American buyer will go to that Chinese frame and assembly factory, and that factory goes out and gets all the component parts from all the different factories that make component parts. They put them on a bike and they ship it to the American customer. Right now, because of the 301 tariffs, I should explain this. When a product is imported into the United States, a tariff is put on it at the border. There's a lot of different percentages, but in the bike industry, it was 11%. That's the standard tariff. So every bike that comes in, the government's taking a 11% tax. A tariff is essentially a tax.
Let me pause you. Is 11% based on the retail value or based on the wholesale value of the bike?
Neither. It's based on the cost of the bike. So it's based on the bill of materials cost out of the exporting country. Say the Chinese factory is called Fushida. So if I go to Fushida and I'm buying my bike and they're charging me $150, I'm paying 11% on the 150 when it comes into the U.S. as the buyer.
Gotcha. Okay, go ahead.
And then I'd sell it as a wholesale price to my retail stores, or maybe I am a retailer, and then they would mark it up to whatever their MSRP is. But so 11% was what it was. The American government recently put these 301 tariffs, they're called, on top of things. So it's 30%. So that's what you hear about in the news when they're saying like, and another $60 billion worth of products had taxes put on them. Although they don't call them taxes, but they are taxes. But anyways, there was another 30% that was added to that. So all of a sudden now it's 41% on that complete bike from China. But the nuance here is that not all those component parts that go onto that bike are made in China. So like Shimano makes really expensive part of the bike, the hub or the drivetrain, or else SRAM makes it. So Shimano's has a big factory in Japan, and SRAM makes all of their stuff in Taiwan. So if you're buying from Fushida in China, Fushida needs to import those hubs or the drivetrain into China. They pay a China tariff on it. Then it goes onto the bike, and then it's shipped to the U.S. and then gets 41% put on it because it's on that bike. But for me here in Detroit, if I buy it directly from Taiwan, if I'm buying the parts the same way that Fushida would, but I'm the central factory, I can buy it straight from Taiwan to me with no tariff on it. And then some parts would come from China, but then maybe I'd make the frame here, which is an expensive component as well. And so it actually makes it so it makes financial sense to get stuff made in America again. I don't want to sound like I'm super supportive of this administration and other areas, but that type of trade policy is important. I mean, the idea that you have a global free market where every country is playing by these same fair rules and we should just back off and let the market sort itself out, it's beautiful in theory, but it's not real in practice. The Chinese government subsidizes their industry. If I were starting Detroit Bikes, but I was in China and I was starting, Shanghai Bikes, the Chinese government would help me pay for my factory space. They'd help subsidize my steel, and they'd give me a big tax return at the end of the year, depending on how much I exported. The American government doesn't do any of that for me. Instead, I just pay a lot of taxes here. So it's not an even playing field. So if my company works as hard and is as smart as a Chinese company, in theory, in an even playing field, we should be as successful. But I can't. I cannot run an American company and compete with a Chinese company the way things are currently set up, because our government has sat back and said, no, it's a free market. But the Chinese government hasn't sat back and said it's a free market. And we haven't done anything to deal with that imbalance. So the fact that the government is currently trying to deal with that imbalance, for me on the ground here in Detroit, is really important. And I know most people in my industry hate the tariffs because they don't make stuff in the U.S. They just buy stuff. They bring it in. And now they have to pay more for it. So they hate that. But if you actually make stuff in this country, the tariffs are really helpful. I mean, same with the wine industry. There's going to be these tariffs on European wine, and it sounds like a jerk move. Like, why do you just want to punish Europeans? So you're going to make people who like wine have to pay more for wine? And I get that. I totally get why importers are mad. They're like, so this wine I used to bring in for $20, it's now $30. They got to raise their prices. It's going to hurt their sales. They make the argument that jobs are going to be affected. But if you're a California winemaker, you're thrilled by that news. Like, if you're actually producing stuff in the States, no one who owns a vineyard in California is mad about these tariffs. They're like, great. Now our California wine's going to be $40 on the shelf, and that French wine's going to be $60. And that's awesome. Like, that's going to actually support American wine production. How I see it from the bike side, it's just, I'm kind of a lone voice, with bikes, because I don't have anyone else really doing it here in the country. So I've got this kind of whole industry saying, get rid of these tariffs, they're bad. And I'm like, hold on, guys. Actually, if administered fairly and evenly, and if the purpose of them is to create an even playing field, I don't see how you can argue against them. They're kind of necessary. And I think, obviously, I've invested, a lot. I moved to a different country, and I really care about this. We kind of need to do this kind of work here. I mean, you look around Detroit and see the kind of desolation, like in the neighborhood we're in. What's going to fix that? It's going to be small scale manufacturing and consumers having better choices and knowing where their stuff comes from, and people here domestically making stuff.
I agree 100%. Do you have a website where people can go check out these bikes?
Yeah, it's www.detroitbikes.com. Detroit like the city, and bikes with an S.com.
And do you sell bikes? Like, you're not just a wholesaler or whatever, right? You're not just a factory. You also sell these bikes?
Yeah, so we're a brand. So we do all this different type of stuff. So we'll manufacture bikes for other companies. We do assembly jobs for other companies. And we also manufacture bikes under our own brand. And we also have a line of bikes where we just do the assembly under our own brand for people who want a bike at a kind of easier to access price point, but it's still, is at least assembled domestically. So we've got kind of a range of products. We also do, one of the big things we do is custom fleets for companies. So if you're a small boutique hotel and you want 10 custom branded bikes, it's kind of hard to call up, a bigger bike company and say, hey, like, I want 10 of something with my paint on it and like my logo. But we love doing that stuff because we're kind of more boutique-y in like how we produce for our own brand anyways. So for us, an order of 10 is really the minimum for custom, but smaller orders like between 10 and, a couple hundred, we do that stuff all the time. So, hotels, breweries, small businesses. We had a local accountant who just wanted to like give his staff a cool present for Christmas and got them all custom bikes.
That is a cool present.
Yeah, it's pretty fun. Even like for local fundraisers, people will donate to some charities, and we work with those charities. So the prize that donor gets is like custom branded bikes for them and their friends, and then they go do a local bike tour. So yeah, we do a lot of that work.
Super awesome. So everybody go to DetroitBikes.com and check some of those things out. What's your price range?
Our entry-level bike is the Sparrow. It's a single speed. It's $399, but that includes free shipping to your house, and it's like basically fully assembled. There's about 5 minutes of work to get it all up and running. Comes with a pump. So that's like, if you haven't ridden a bike in 10 years and you're like, you've heard this podcast and you're thinking, you know what, I live in a city where, like Steve and his wife, I'm 2 miles from downtown. Hey, it is a pain in the butt to drive downtown and find parking. And maybe it would be nice to have like a little exercise before and after dinner, and you just kind of want to get into it, but you don't want to invest a crazy amount of money. The Sparrow's a really good entry-level bike to get back into cycling, especially if you're somewhere kind of flat. It's a single speed. And then the bikes go up to $1,249. So that's for our bike with an American-made chromoly steel frame, so super high-end material. It's got a lifetime warranty, and it's got premium parts, so like a Brooks saddle. These are seats that retail for, hundreds of dollars. Shimano Alfine hub, just really high quality component parts that really make for a pretty luxurious high-end ride, kind of the whole spectrum there. But our bikes are definitely, they're city oriented. If you're looking to get into, racing or extreme mountain biking or anything like that, we're more sort of city focused.
Gotcha. And how about social media? Why don't you give everybody the company and your personal social media?
Well, I'm Zak Pashak on kind of everything. So yeah, you could just find me that way. ZAK, last name PASHAK. And then Detroit Bikes, it's just at Detroit Bikes. So that's us on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. We're on all of those things.
Nice. And before we let you go, Zach, is there anything that we didn't talk about or I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about?
No, we've covered a lot of ground.
Well, thank you again so much for taking the time out of your busy day and letting us get to know you a little bit better on Fascination Street, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it was really good talking with you. Thanks.
Absolutely. And everybody, seriously, go check out these bikes. I was looking at them online, and not only are they, I guess, which was sort of your goal, was to not be in the, the super cheap and kind of not good quality price range, and then not the crazy expensive price range. So I feel like you have a really good selection of nestled right in the middle, of the price range that's out there available, and they are gorgeous. So everybody go check these things out. They're really cool. And again, Zach, I can't thank you enough, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you. That was great.
You have a great rest of your day, man.
All right, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. As always, thanks for listening, Streetwalkers. And don't forget, follow the show on Twitter at FascinationSTPD, on Instagram at Fascination Street Pod. Follow the podcast page on Facebook at Fascination Street Podcast. And of course, you can always email me at fascinationstreetpod@gmail.com. And if you haven't already, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button and rate us on iTunes. Opening music is the song Magnolia from the 2014 album Intransigence, used with permission from Douglas Miles Clark. Closing music is Apollo from the 2001 album Into the Known by the band Sapphire. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting to know a little bit about our guest. We'll see you next time on Fascination Street.